Some storms never make the news. Some never leave. In northern Vermont, where the summers are short and the storms come fast, there is a town called Maple Hollow, small enough to miss on most maps, but big enough to remember what it lost. At the edge of town, past the last mailbox and the faded green sign that marks the boundary of the state forest, there stands an old shed. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. Tin roof, nailed windows, padlock rusted shut. A shed that no one had opened in over a decade. On a damp April morning in 2024, Gary Haskins, a retired handyman, was clearing out a stretch of overgrown land behind a property he'd just been hired to clean up. The house had sat empty for years, its last owner gone, its furniture molded, its past sealed off. The kind of place people drove past without looking. The shed was locked, but the door frame had warped from years of frost and neglect. Gary pried it open with a crowbar. The door groaned, then gave way with the sound of splintered wood. Dust drifted in the air. Inside, the light cut through slats in the boarded-up window like the bars of a cell. And there, lying in the far corner, partially collapsed on itself, was a child's red umbrella. It was small, faded, the fabric torn along one edge, the metal ribs poking through like broken fingers. But it was unmistakably a child's. And on the handle, still visible beneath the dust and cobwebs, was a single name written in black marker. Eli. Gary didn't know the name. Not right away. Not until the deputy came out, walked around the shed, stepped inside, and went quiet. Eli Whitmore had been missing for 11 years. And that umbrella had vanished with him. It was the 11th of June, 2013, the day the town stopped breathing. Eli was 9 years old, brown hair, eyes the color of ash before rain. He was last seen walking home from the public library just before a thunderstorm rolled in. He carried a red umbrella. That's what the neighbors remembered most. Not his backpack, not his clothes, the umbrella. The red of it like a flare against the gray sky. And then, nothing. No screams, no body, no trail, just silence. The search began that night as the storm broke over Maple Hollow with sheets of rain and wind that snapped power lines and flooded basements. Volunteers combed the woods with flashlights. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Dogs caught traces, then lost them again in the mud. For weeks the town held its breath. Then for months, then for years. And still no trace of Eli Whitmore. Until now. The discovery of the umbrella was not reported on the evening news. Not at first. It came quietly, an old man, a locked shed, a name no one had said aloud in a long time. But in Maple Hollow, the whisper moved faster than any broadcast ever could. Rachel Whitmore, Eli's mother, hadn't spoken to reporters in years. Not since the 5-year mark. She'd refused interviews, ignored camera crews, changed her number. But when the deputy called, when he said the word umbrella, she drove to the edge of town and stood outside the shed for almost an hour before asking to see it. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just knelt, touched the handle, and said, "That's his. That's Eli's." The rain began again that night. A light, steady drizzle tapping on rooftops. No thunder. Just the kind of soft rain that brings back memory like a song you forgot you loved. They reopened the case the next morning. But reopening a cold case doesn't mean it ever got warm. The umbrella was taken into evidence. The shed was photographed, measured, analyzed. The floor was dirt-packed and dry. No footprints, no blood, no bones. Just cobwebs, mildew, and that red umbrella. The shed had been locked from the outside. The chain had not been broken, which meant someone had locked it, and no one had touched it since. No one knew who had the key. The last known owner of the property had died in 2012, a year before Eli disappeared. The house had remained empty, transferred between banks and distant relatives, but no one had moved in. No one had reason to go behind the property. No one had reason to open that shed. And yet the umbrella was there. Rachel asked to keep it. They wouldn't let her. It was evidence now. But she told the deputy something he didn't forget. She said, "That umbrella was broken the day he left. He wouldn't have used it unless he had to." The weather reports from the 11th of June, 2013 confirmed heavy rainfall and winds beginning around 4:45 p.m. Eli was last seen at 4:32 p.m., walking past Harlan Street, heading east toward his home on Maple Avenue. His route would have taken him past the intersection at Carson Hill Road, less than a mile from the shed. But no one reported seeing him after that. One woman claimed she saw a child standing near the bus stop shelter during the storm, but couldn't confirm it was Eli. Another neighbor thought she saw someone walking with a red umbrella through her kitchen window, but the angle was wrong, the distance too far. The sightings blurred over time, like footprints in rain. At 6:42 p.m., Rachel called 911. Eli wasn't home. The storm was still raging. His friends hadn't seen him. His teachers hadn't heard from him. His father, Michael Whitmore, had just returned from work and joined the search himself, sloshing through backyards and alleyways with a flashlight and wet shoes. But they never found him. They drained the quarry, dredged the creek, searched the crawl spaces of every unoccupied home. But Eli was gone. And now, 11 years later, his umbrella was back. Theories would come later. Speculation, rumors, names. But on that first day, as the clouds broke open again and the wind pushed through the trees like it was chasing something long overdue, the only thing anyone knew was this: the umbrella had waited. And something had kept it waiting. Some storms end. They pass, and the sky clears, and the air smells like earth and second chances. But not this one. This one stayed. And in Maple Hollow, Vermont, the storm never really ended. It just grew quiet. It settled into walls, into sidewalks, into closed doors and quiet glances. It became part of the town, like rust on a hinge or dust in the attic. And then one day, without warning, it opened its mouth again, and whispered the name. Eli. It was supposed to be just another summer, but summers have long shadows when someone disappears in the middle of them. He was 9 years old. Born in the early hours of a May morning, with thunder in the distance and lilacs blooming along the hospital parking lot. His name was Eli James Whitmore. The name Eli came from his grandfather. James came from no one in particular. It just felt right. He had a cowlick that never laid flat, a soft, permanent furrow between his brows when he was thinking, which was often. He liked strawberry yogurt, treasure maps, and lining up his pencils by color. He wasn't loud. He wasn't shy. He was just there, present, noticeable in the way a light is, even when no one's looking directly at it. The house he grew up in sat on Maple Avenue, 3 blocks from the library and 2 from the elementary school. The kind of place where windows were left cracked in the summer and kids biked in loose clusters until the sun dropped behind the trees. His room faced the backyard, blue curtains, a glow-in-the-dark map of the solar system on the ceiling. The last thing he saw every night was the tiny green outline of Saturn above his bed. Rachel, his mother, worked part-time at the town clinic. Michael, his father, was a technician for the county water department. They weren't wealthy. They weren't poor. They had just enough to buy Eli the books he wanted, the occasional extra scoop of ice cream, and a red umbrella he insisted on using whether it was raining or not. No one knew why the umbrella mattered to him. Maybe it made him feel like a detective. Maybe it was his version of armor. The handle was red plastic, curved, the kind you could hook over your wrist. He carried it like a sword some days, like a flag on others. In the only surviving home video, he's 5 years old, running through the backyard during a light drizzle, spinning the umbrella above him like a carousel. His voice is faint under the rain, but you can hear it if you listen closely. He's saying, "It's not a storm. It's just sky water." He was that kind of kid. The summer of 2013 had started like any other. Field day at school, fireflies, baseball. The chalk drawings on the sidewalk out front were still there the day he vanished. 2 stars and a crooked rocket ship with the words, "To Mars," scrawled underneath in yellow Crayola. Rachel said she last saw him at 3:40 p.m. on the 11th of June. He'd just gotten back from school, dropped his bag inside the doorway, and asked if he could go to the library. He liked the old section, where the paperbacks smelled like dust and no one asked questions. She said yes. He took the umbrella, even though it wasn't raining. Not yet. The librarian remembered him. checked out 2 Hardy Boys books and a dog-eared guide to knot tying. He sat at the reading table for a while, then left around 4:20. That was the last confirmed sighting of Eli Whitmore. What followed were only shadows. A neighbor thought she saw him cross Carson Hill Road. A man driving past the gas station remembered a flash of red on the sidewalk. But no one was certain. Time bends around trauma. What's vivid becomes cloudy. What's faint becomes gospel. The thing about small towns is that memory becomes collective. People remember what others remembered before them. It becomes a kind of folklore. But this story wasn't folklore. It was Rachel's son. She never stopped setting the table for 3, not even when the reporters came, not even after they stopped. She kept his room untouched. On his birthday, she left a cupcake on the nightstand and lit a candle for 60 seconds, just long enough for a wish. Michael dealt with the silence differently. He stopped fixing the porch light, stopped answering the phone. He started walking in the evenings, long loops around the neighborhood, always ending at the foot of Carson Hill Road, where the sidewalk disappeared into trees. They never left Maple Hollow, not even when they could have, not even when everyone told them it would be easier somewhere else. The town didn't forget Eli either, not for a long time. His face was on the bulletin board at the post office for 5 years straight. His name was whispered like a prayer at every 4th of July service. Kids who were 6 at the time of his disappearance grew up hearing his name the way you hear about someone else's childhood friend. Real, but fading. And yet some things didn't fade. In the back of his 3rd grade classroom, one of his old drawings stayed pinned to the corkboard long after the papers changed. It was a picture of a treehouse, 3 levels, a ladder, a rope swing. A sign on the door that said, "No adults allowed." No one took it down. Even after the room became the art class, even after the building closed. Eli wasn't the kind of kid who caused ripples. He was the ripple. Small, almost invisible at first, but spreading, touching more than anyone realized. In the months after his disappearance, there were vigils, balloons, candlelight walks, the kind of gestures people make when they have nothing else to offer but presents. Rachel showed up to every one of them. Michael did too, always together, never touching. It's easy to forget the weight of absence, but absence has mass. It takes up rooms. It eats space. It bends the air around it until everything feels quieter than it should be. In Maple Hollow, the summer of 2013 never truly ended. It lingered. In the way people looked away when they passed Rachel in the grocery store, in the way thunder made children stop playing and look toward the trees, in the way no one ever went near the old property on Carson Hill, not because it was haunted, but because it wasn't. Because it was just there, waiting, like the umbrella, like the storm, like a shadow too long for a single season. Sometimes the final steps aren't marked by footprints, just silence. Elfty. The library in Maple Hollow was never large. Just 2 rooms and a side hall built in 1913 and barely updated since. Its windows fogged when it rained. Its floors creaked under every step. The children's section sat beneath a flickering skylight, the kind of light that never stayed on long enough to read by, but never went fully dark. At 4:20 p.m., on the 11th of June 2013, the librarian saw Eli Whitmore walk out through the side door, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his red umbrella dangling from his hand. It wasn't raining yet, but it was coming. The clouds had been thick all day low, heavy, pressing down on the rooftops like a warning. Storm watches had been issued that morning, and by mid-afternoon, local radar showed a wide green band stretching east across the county. Ellie didn't hurry. That's what stuck with her. He didn't run, didn't look nervous. He just walked like he always walked, measured, quiet in his own world. From the library to his house was 9 blocks, 15 minutes on foot, maybe 20 with puddles. He never made it. 2 blocks from the library, the sidewalk bends near Harlan Street. A wide tree shades the corner, and a bus stop shelter stands with its glass panels smeared by years of handprints and weather. A local woman named Anna Trask, walking her dog just before the rain, later told police she saw a boy standing near the shelter around 4:35. She didn't speak to him. She didn't stop. But she remembered the red umbrella. Not open, just hanging down, resting against the boy's leg. But her view was quick no more than 3 or 4 seconds. She couldn't be sure it was Eli. She only realized the significance after the news came that night. The storm hit at 4:48 p.m. Hard. Thunder like a slammed door, wind that pulled branches sideways, streets turned to rivers in less than an hour. The kind of storm that makes even adults feel small. At 5:15, a man driving north on Carson Hill Road reported seeing what he thought was a child in a raincoat walking just off the shoulder, heading toward the woods. The rain blurred the windshield. He slowed, looked again, and the figure was gone. He wasn't sure what he'd seen. He told himself it was nothing. It wouldn't be the first time someone looked away when they should have stopped. Back at the Whitmore home, Rachel was watching the clock. Eli was never late. By 5:30, she was calling his name out the back door. By 6 o'clock, she was calling his friend's parents. By 6:42, she was calling 911. Dispatch logged the call as a possible overdue juvenile. The first officer arrived at 6:58. He took a description: brown hair, blue jacket, red umbrella. He said, "Maybe he ducked into someone's garage. Maybe he's waiting it out." Rachel said no. Eli would have come home. The search began within the hour. 2 cruisers fanned out along Harland and Maple. Officers knocked on doors. One neighbor said she thought she saw a red flash near the old bridge. Another wasn't sure. The rain was still coming down, harder now, and the light was already dimming. At 8:12 p.m., the search expanded to include volunteers. Flashlights moved in slow lines through the woods. Boots sunk in mud. Calls of "Eli" echoed into trees too thick for sound to carry. No one answered. By midnight, the fire department had joined. Search dogs were brought in but lost the scent before the edge of the creek. The water was high, the current fast. But no clothing, no shoes, no trace. By morning, the storm had passed. And Eli was still gone. They drained the drainage ditch near Carson Hill, cleared the culverts, checked under porches, inside storage bins, abandoned trucks, crawl spaces. Nothing. The only thing left behind was a partial footprint, near the footbridge a child's size, but smeared, waterlogged, incomplete. It led nowhere. Like everything else. Michael Whitmore didn't sleep that night. He walked the loop again and again, Harlan to Carson, Carson to Maple, around the back of the middle school, past the baseball field, then back. He said nothing. Not to officers, not to reporters, not even to Rachel. Rachel cried in the living room, still wearing the sweater Eli had tugged earlier that day. She didn't change out of it for 3 days. The news picked it up by morning. 9-year, old boy missing in Maple Hollow storm. They used the only photo Rachel gave them. Eli standing in the backyard the previous spring, holding the umbrella, smiling just slightly. The sky behind him was gray, the grass still damp from winter. By noon, local stations had reporters in town. By dusk, the state police were involved. Helicopters, heat drones, grids. But still nothing. No jacket, no backpack, no umbrella. Just space where a child should have been. The theories came quickly. He wandered into the woods. He slipped and hit his head. He was swept into a drain. But no blood. No evidence. No reason. They even considered abduction. But no witnesses, no vehicles, no signs of struggle. Ellie had simply vanished. In a town of less than 2,000 people, where everyone knew everyone, that was supposed to be impossible. But that's the thing about storms. They take things, and sometimes they don't give them back. What remained was a route, a 15-minute walk, and somewhere along it, Eli disappeared. The final steps of a child, lost in the rain, became a wound the town couldn't close. People stopped letting their kids walk alone. They drove to school instead. They locked their sheds, their garages, their basements. The storm had passed. But something else stayed. Something quiet. Something watching. And in the middle of it, always a red umbrella. Still open in people's memories. Still waiting. When the world moves on, some towns don't. Some can't. Maple Hollow isn't a place most people find by accident. It sits tucked between 2 ridgelines in northern Vermont, Hemmed in by old pine forests and forgotten railroad tracks, its streets named for trees and presidents, its silence broken mostly by birds and passing storms. On paper, it is unremarkable. But maps don't measure grief. And grief lingers. The summer of 2013 hung like a question mark over the town known that never resolved. After the floodwaters receded, after the volunteers went home, and the television crews packed their cables, the search for Eli Whitmore became something else. Not an operation, not an effort, but an ache. A dull, steady presence in the bones of a community that didn't know how to forget. For the first week, the town moved as one. Every night, people gathered outside the Whitmore home, neighbors, friends, teachers. They brought food they didn't expect anyone to eat. They lit candles. Not because they thought the light would bring Eli home, but because doing nothing felt worse. Children held signs that said, "We miss you, Eli." A local pastor led prayer circles by the playground. The town hall stayed open late, just in case someone remembered something. It wasn't hope exactly. It was motion. Motion keeps despair from setting. By week 3, the posters had begun to curl at the corners. The candles were replaced by flyers stapled to telephone poles and taped to store windows. Missing, above a photo that no longer needed a caption, it was Eli. Everyone knew. The sheriff's office held a press conference at day 28. They said the investigation was ongoing, that all leads were being followed, that the community's cooperation had been tremendous. But the words fell flat. Behind closed doors, people whispered what they couldn't say aloud. Maybe he ran away. Maybe someone took him. Maybe it was someone local. Because in a town this small, monsters don't stay hidden. Unless they live next door. Rachel and Michael appeared one more time, on a local news station, their faces hollow from exhaustion, their hands folded tightly in their laps. Rachel spoke softly. "If you know anything at all, please come forward. We just want to bring our son home." Michael didn't speak. Not on camera. Not that day. Not for many days after. As summer turned to fall, the search scaled back. The helicopters were grounded. The state investigators moved on to other cases. The official term was cold. But cold isn't quiet. It hums under the surface. In 2014, the town built a small memorial garden near the elementary school. A plaque beneath a young sugar maple read, "In memory of the missing. May your story still be told." Rachel visited it often, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing, sometimes just to sit. Children who once played with Eli began to grow up. Their memories softened, details lost to time. But certain things stayed. The red umbrella, the way he always smelled like pencil shavings and clean laundry, the way he laughed with his whole body, like he hadn't learned yet to hold anything back. People move on. They remarry. They repaint. They revise. But some don't. Rachel never left town, never changed the locks. She kept the front porch light on for 7 years. She kept the sweater she wore the day he disappeared, folded in a box beneath her bed. She kept hope, even when it turned sour. Michael changed too. He began to spend more time on the road, taking longer shifts, volunteering for routes out of town. He couldn't look at the corner of Carson Hill without clenching his jaw. He stopped speaking at vigils. He just stood there, tall, silent, vanishing in his own way. Each the 11th of June, the town rang the church bell at 4:32 p.m., the time Eli was last seen. People would stop what they were doing, for just a minute, for just enough. They never found a body. They never found a footprint. They never found a reason. But they remembered. Even 11 years later, when the umbrella surfaced in that locked shed at the edge of town, people still remembered, not just the name, but the feeling, the sky that night, the silence, the emptiness that followed like a shadow. Gary Haskins didn't know what he was stepping into when he broke the lock on that door. He was just clearing brush, just opening a space no one had touched in years. But when the light from his flashlight fell on the red curve of that plastic handle, something shifted. Some wounds don't heal. They wait, like coiled wire, like thunder in dry air. The umbrella had waited, and now the town would have to remember again. The sheriff's department took possession of the object. It was logged, tagged, tested. The dust on it dated to at least a decade prior. No fingerprints, no DNA, just rot, mildew, and that name, faded but visible, ink bleeding into plastic. Eli. The shed itself was part of a property long vacant. Its last legal owner had died in 2012. No tenants, no utilities, no known visitors. The door had been locked from the outside, the chain padlocked, the windows nailed shut. There was no reason for the umbrella to be there, unless someone had put it there, unless Eli had been there. It didn't make sense. But the thing about cold cases doesn't matter. Presence does. The umbrella didn't bring answers. It brought questions, a reopening, a fracture. And for a town that had tried quietly, gently to close the door on its deepest pain, it felt like a gust of wind through an open window. Not violent, but undeniable. Something had come back, and it had brought the storm with it. Some things are found. Some things reveal themselves. The umbrella wasn't just old. It had aged in silence. When crime scene investigators stepped into the shed, the air was thick with rot and memory. The temperature inside was several degrees cooler than outside, as if the space had learned to keep its breath shallow. Dust layered every surface. Spider webs hung from the corners in quiet, gauzy loops. The wooden floor was uneven, the planks warping slightly from years of neglect. No footprints, no signs of recent entry. But there in the far corner, angled as if someone had once set it down carefully and never came back for it, was a red umbrella, collapsed, torn. One rib bent backwards, a child's umbrella, with a curved plastic handle and a name written in faded black Sharpie. Eli. The forensic techs moved slow, like the space might resist their presence. The umbrella was photographed, bagged, catalogued. A partial analysis showed traces of degraded pollen birch, oak, some pine resin, but nothing unusual. No blood, no tissue, no fingerprints. Still, it felt like evidence. And more than that, it felt like something had finally spoken. The shed's door had been sealed with a rusted padlock, linked through an old metal chain, looped twice around the handle. The lock was dated, manufactured in 2009. No signs of tampering. No duplication key on file with the county. The last legal owner of the property, Arthur Helling, died in October 2012, 9 months before Eli disappeared. He had no children, no tenants, no will. The house was passed through probate, untouched. So how did an umbrella belonging to a boy who vanished in June 2013 end up locked inside a shed no one had touched since 2012? That question would echo for days. The sheriff at the time, Lorna Briggs, was retired now, but she came back into the station the morning the umbrella was confirmed. She sat across from the new lead detective and laid out what she remembered. He was a quiet boy, she said. Didn't wander, didn't play in places he shouldn't. Someone put that umbrella there. Someone with a reason. No one disagreed. But there were no leads. The case file was reopened. Rachel and Michael Whitmore were called in separately. Rachel identified the umbrella immediately, not just from memory, from a photo she had taken 2 weeks before Eli vanished. In it, he's standing in front of the school library with the umbrella hooked over his arm. One of the ribs already bent, the same bend now frozen in time, in a dark shed 11 years later. Michael said nothing. He just stared at the evidence photo, then asked to leave the room. In the days that followed, investigators re-walked the route Eli would have taken home. From the library, past Harlan Street, across Carson Hill, toward Maple Avenue, then out toward the shed 5 miles away, in the opposite direction. That didn't make sense. Eli wasn't a wanderer. He wasn't adventurous in that way. His mother called him steady. His teachers called him predictable. He had a path and he stuck to it. So the idea that he might have wandered into the woods toward a locked shed at the edge of an abandoned property didn't sit right, but the umbrella was there. And sometimes, in true crime, the object matters more than the explanation. They canvassed nearby houses, interviewed the new property owner who'd recently purchased the land at auction, sight unseen. He knew nothing. Hadn't even entered the shed before sending Gary Haskins out to clear it. There were no cameras in the area, no neighbors within earshot, no one who remembered seeing anything in June 2013. But there was one small detail. The umbrella wasn't molded completely. Despite the decay, despite the years of moisture and heat and freeze, it retained a strange dryness, like it had been stored somewhere else, somewhere protected, before being moved into the shed. The forensic report listed it plainly. Possible secondary placement. In other words, the umbrella had not been there for 11 years. It had been placed there later, after the search had stopped, after the case had cooled, after people had stopped looking, and whoever placed it there had a key. That changed everything. The working theory shifted. What if Eli hadn't gone to the shed? What if Eli had been taken somewhere else, and someone had kept the umbrella all these years? The implications were quiet, heavy. It wasn't just a storm. It wasn't just a boy lost to rain and timing. It might have been something else. And now the town had to face the possibility it had buried a secret it never meant to keep. Rachel returned to the memorial garden that afternoon. She sat alone on the bench beneath the plaque. She didn't bring flowers this time. She just watched the shadows shift across the grass. When a reporter approached and asked what she thought about the umbrella being found, she only said one sentence. He wouldn't have left it behind. The town listened. At the post office, someone taped up a new flyer. Not missing. Not, have you seen this child? Just a photo of the umbrella, and underneath, this was his. 11 years later, it still is. The sheriff's department, announced a new tip line. Anonymous, open-ended. No arrests. No suspects. No answers. But one question had returned. If the umbrella came back, where was Eli? Memory doesn't fade. It distorts, and sometimes it hides what it fears the most. For weeks after the umbrella was found, the town of Maple Hollow moved differently. Slower, quieter, as if someone had turned the volume down on daily life and left only the echo of things unsaid. The renewed investigation brought back faces no one had seen in years: state agents, old reporters, even Sheriff Lorna Briggs, now in her 70s, walking with a cane and a grief she wore like a coat that never came off. People started remembering things. Not details exactly, just feelings. An unease. A shadow. And then, one evening, a woman called the tip line. Her name was Linda Kay. She'd lived in Maple Hollow all her life, taught English at the high school until she retired in 2017. Soft-spoken. Observant. The kind of person who notices small things and never forgets them. She said she didn't come forward back then because it hadn't felt like anything at the time. Just a shape in the storm. The 11th of June, 2013, around 5:10 p.m. Linda was in her living room, looking out through the bay window that faced Carson Hill Road. She remembered the storm, a bad one. She remembered the lights flickering. She remembered pouring a cup of tea and pausing at the window, something catching her eye. Across the road, near the edge of the woods, she saw someone standing still. Not moving, not walking, just standing. A man, tall, wearing a dark raincoat, hood up, facing the tree line. She couldn't see his face. She couldn't be sure of anything, really. But what stayed with her was how long he stood there, unmoving, as if he was waiting for something or someone. At the time, it seemed strange, but not alarming. But when she saw the news about the umbrella, something in her stomach turned. She said it was like remembering a smell you hadn't thought of in years. Familiar. Wrong. The man in the raincoat was never reported. There had been no composite sketch, no formal investigation into such a figure. It was just another ghost in the fog of that summer. But now, 11 years later, he was no longer just a shape. He was a question. Investigators combed through old witness statements. One caught their attention. A neighbor on Maple Avenue, Eli's street had told police in 2013 that on the morning of the 10th of June, the day before the storm, she noticed a man sitting in an old blue truck across from the Whitmore house. He sat there for nearly 30 minutes, engine off, just watching. She assumed he was a meter reader or a contractor, but after Eli vanished, the truck never came back. That detail had gone nowhere at the time. There were no security cameras, no license plate, nothing to connect it to anything else. Now, with Linda Kay's memory of the man in the raincoat parked, watching, waiting, a picture began to form. Not a clear one, but a darker one. A local hunter, Ben Trott, came forward next. He said he remembered seeing a raincoat hanging on a fence post near the Helling property in the fall of 2014, just a year after Eli disappeared. He hadn't thought much of it. Abandoned clothes were common in the woods, but he described it as long, dark green with a broken zipper. When police asked if he could describe where exactly, he said he couldn't remember the spot anymore. The raincoat was never recovered. But now, it was part of the story. The possibility took shape. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. And maybe, just maybe, someone had returned to that shed years later, long after the town had stopped looking, and placed that umbrella there on purpose. A message. A mistake. A memory breaking through. The case began to shift. Investigators reopened files on known offenders in the surrounding counties. They looked at parole records, property access logs, utility bills, hunting licenses. Anyone who had reason to be near Carson Hill Road in the summer of 2013. One name came up. Walter Price, age 57. A maintenance contractor who had worked sporadically in the area between 2010 and 2014. He had no criminal record, no known connections to the Whitmores, and no address in Maple Hollow. But he did own a blue 1996 Ford pickup. He died in 2015. Car accident. Single vehicle. No autopsy performed. His name was never mentioned in the original investigation. But when his old property in a neighboring county was quietly searched, among the decaying tools and water-damaged boxes, investigators found something. A notebook. Water-stained. Molded. Inside were loose sketches, childlike drawings. Dozens of them. Trees, sheds, roads. One drawing showed a small figure under a red umbrella. No name. No date. No answers. Just more silence. Rachel was never told about the notebook. Michael was. He sat in the back of the police cruiser, holding the photocopied pages in his lap, not speaking. Finally he asked, "Did he take my son?" No one answered. Because, in Maple Hollow, truth is never loud. It arrives like a storm, front slow at first, then all at once. And just like that, the image of the man in the raincoat went from shadow to shape, from maybe to memory. It had no face, no voice, no proof, but he had a presence. And now, after 11 years, the question returned with its sharpest edge yet. Had Eli been seen that night? And if so, by who? When you run out of facts, the only thing louder than silence is speculation. By the time a case turns cold, it stops being about what happened. It becomes about what could have. With the discovery of the umbrella and the reappearance of the man in the raincoat, only as a story retold through foggy memory, Maple Hollow found itself caught between wanting closure and fearing what closure might mean. Theories began to circulate again. Not just in hushed conversations or police files, but in grocery aisles and comment threads. Whispers that once seemed too cruel to speak aloud had returned. Only now. They came with a weight of possibility. Maybe Eli wandered off into the woods. Maybe he drowned. Maybe he was taken. Maybe he never made it past Carson Hill at all. But if that last one were true, why was the umbrella found 5 miles away? Why was it preserved? Why had someone locked it away? The new detective assigned to the case, Julian Marks, sat in a windowless room with 24 boxes of evidence and no straight line between any two of them. He told a colleague, off the record, that the case felt like a mirror cracked from the inside. Every reflection showed a different version of the truth. The sound of water plays a recurring role in every theory. The storm, the creek, the drainage system, the old culvert under Carson Hill Road. On the 13th of June, 2013, 2 days after Eli vanished, searchers noted a disturbed patch of mud near the opening of the culvert. A footprint, partial, possibly a child's, but, with the rain, nothing held. They moved on. In 2024, the culvert was re-examined. Nothing was found. But water isn't a keeper of secrets. It washes. It carries. It erases. Some locals still believe he fell swept away by runoff, carried into the deeper woods, lost in terrain even drones can't fully map. But experts dispute this. Eli's route home didn't take him near the culvert. And no evidence, no clothing, no tissue, no blood was ever found downstream. So the theory that lingers, the one that refuses to let go, is the one no one wants to say out loud. Someone took him, and kept him, and moved the umbrella later. But who? The town had no known predators, no registered offenders, no suspicious vehicles logged that week. The man in the raincoat, if he existed, had no name. And Walter Price had had now. His strange drawings rotting in a box was no longer an answer, just another locked door. Then there were the lies. People lie in investigations. Sometimes out of fear. Sometimes for attention. Sometimes because their memory tells them something that isn't true. A neighbor came forward claiming he'd seen Eli days before the disappearance in an argument with an older teen near the library. That claim was debunked within hours. Eli had been in school at the time. Another man from 2 counties over insisted he'd seen a child matching Eli's description in the back seat of a station wagon heading west, days after the storm. But the highway camera showed no such vehicle at the time. Each false lead reopened the wound, only to pack it with more doubt. Michael stopped returning calls from police. Rachel stopped speaking at all. In private, she wrote in her journal, "If no one saw him leave the sidewalk, then maybe he never did." And for a quiet theory among law enforcement was this: what if Eli never made it past the block? What if he was lured? What if someone he knew, someone from the town, took him? Not a stranger, but someone familiar enough to lower his guard. That theory never went public, but it bled into the investigation. Interviews were reconducted. Old residents tracked down. Background checks run again. Still, the case would not break open. Then came something unexpected. During a forensic audit of the audio evidence from 2013 mostly 911 calls, officer body cam footage and field recordings, a technician stumbled on a short, low-quality tape made during the original shed search. It was never fully logged. Just labeled Shed, Interior, Audio, Number 2. It had been recorded by an investigator who placed a handheld device inside the shed for ambient analysis standard in missing persons cases to capture environmental sound for spatial study. The audio was brief. Mostly silence. The rustle of trees outside, a dog barking far off, the groan of the wind. But at timestamp 048, there is something else. Faint, just 2 syllables. A child's voice. On the edge of clarity. Mom. Technicians ran enhancement software. The waveform spiked. The tone matched a prepubescent vocal range. It couldn't be dated. It couldn't be authenticated. But it was there. Rachel was not told. Neither was Michael. The audio was flagged, archived, and then quietly shelved. Because in true crime, there are moments when the truth brushes up against the story and the story flinches. Theory don't close cases. Evidence does. But sometimes evidence whispers. And sometimes no one wants to hear what it says. The town had gone silent again. Only this time the silence felt different. Not like grief, like waiting. And just beneath it, beneath the hush of wind and the drone of rain gutters, was a sound no one could unhear. A voice, soft, uncertain, calling for someone who wasn't there anymore. Mom. Some objects remember, and some skies never forget. It was twilight when the deputy brought the umbrella into evidence. Late April. Cold again. The kind of evening when the sun doesn't set, just dims until everything looks like memory. The handle was red. Still. Not the same red it had been in 2013, bright and smooth and plastic shiny. Now it was scuffed, dull, worn to the bone in places, but it held, like it had been gripped, like someone didn't want to let go, like it had been used. Recently. That was what chilled the room more than any report. The umbrella had not aged like something lost in the woods for 11 years. It had aged like something kept, stored, moved. The forensic techs were careful. They took soil samples from the fabric folds. They ran UV light across the metal frame. They tested the water stains, cataloged the mold. Every detail was logged. And every detail said the same thing. This umbrella had not been here since 2013. Someone had placed it, deliberately, in a locked shed, on land no one had entered in years. They looked again at the lock. Same as before, rusted, unbroken. But the pin inside showed faint scrape marks, old but not ancient, as if someone had used a key, or something close to one. The door had not been forced. The umbrella had not been dropped. It had been left, which meant someone still remembered. The sheriff's office didn't say that in their report. They called it a probable object of evidentiary value. But that's not what the umbrella was. It was a message, and the town heard it. Michael Whitmore returned to the property 3 days after the shed was cleared. No cameras, no escort. Just him and the fence and the sound of wind through brittle grass. He stood there for nearly an hour, eyes fixed on the door. Then he walked back to his truck and drove away. He never said a word about it. Rachel was quieter still. The news crews returned at least for a while, but she declined every interview. She didn't want a documentary. She didn't want a platform. She just wanted to know if Eli had stood there, if he had breathed that air, if he had looked out the boarded window and wondered why no one came. There were no footprints in the shed, no hair, no fingerprints. Nothing to say he had ever been there except that one thing, the umbrella. It wasn't enough. Not legally. Not for a conviction. Not for a press conference. But it was enough to break something open in the people who had tried to move on. Eli's school held a silent assembly. His teachers, long since reassigned, sent letters. His old classmates, now adults, many with children of their own, lit candles and posted photos of their third-grade class. The ones with Eli in the back row, smiling, half shy. Holding that same red umbrella, the sheriff issued one final update. The case remains open. No new suspects. No further comment. And then, just like that, the news cycle turned again. But Maple Hollow did not. The garden outside the elementary school now has a second plaque. Red handle, black sky. In memory of Eli Whitmore. Missing but never gone. No one knows who suggested the phrase. It just appeared. Approved. Installed. Rachel visits sometimes. Not as often. But she still wears the same coat. Still walks the same sidewalk Eli once did. And sometimes, when the sky turns that strange Vermont gray and the wind carries the edge of a storm no one saw coming, she swears she hears something. A breath. A footstep. A voice. Sometimes it's just the rain. But sometimes it's something else. And always it ends the same way. With silence. With air too still. With the red handle of an umbrella that should never have come back, but did. Because storms don't take what we love and forget. They hold it. They bury it. And then, sometimes, when the air is just right, they give it back. Not the boy. Not the truth. Just a piece. Just enough. Just a red handle beneath a black sky.